But D Mac, let's talk. So, I just wanted to go over something real quick. A good thing versus a God thing. This is something that just came into my spirit to talk about. So, I got up and decided to talk about it. A good thing versus a God thing. So, salute everybody. This is your boy D Mac. Let's talk. There's a scripture that says, "There's a way to a man that seemeth right, but the end thereof is death." And what that means is that sometimes we think something is good, and it may look good in the carnal or in the natural, but really in the spiritual, it is death. And we are hurting ourselves, and we are not in the same mindset as God when we do these things. So I wanted to bring attention to this because a lot of times we get caught up in things and we think that we're doing something good, but we're not doing what God would have us to do, i.e., bringing up the term good thing versus God thing. First example I really want to talk about is King Saul, because King Saul in himself is an example of good thing versus a God thing. Now, the whole reason that King Saul was even appointed king over Israel is because the people were jealous of the other nations around them that had kings. They had a straight relationship with God. It says, "I'm your God and you are my people." And God governed the people, but they wanted to be like the other nations, and they thought it would be good to be ruled by a king. And so God said, "Okay, if this is what you think is a good thing, I'm going to give you what you want. But believe me, what you want is not going to be what you really want." And he said, "I'm going to give you a king who's going to make your daughters slaves in his house. He's going to send your sons out to war, and he's going to cause all of this heaviness placed on the people." And people's like, "Okay, just as long as we can be like the other nations and have our king." And so Saul was found amongst the people. He was a shoulder length or a head above everybody else, and all of those aspects. And he became the king. And throughout his reign, he did a lot of things that in the eyes of the people, it looked good, but it wasn't God. Like when God told them to go up and to destroy this nation, and he said, "Destroy everything, don't leave anything alive." But Saul gets there, and he's like, "Okay, we'll take the king and we'll ransom the king. We'll take this cattle and keep the cattle for ourselves." That's a good thing in the eyes of the people, in the eyes of the soldiers. But that's not what God told him to do. So in that instance, a good thing was definitely not a good thing. It wasn't a God thing. They saw it as a good thing, but it wasn't a God thing. And it caused God to say, "All right, people, we got you. We understand what's going on." I don't know what that was just now, but okay, God, I hear you. But back to what I was saying. So Saul, he was definitely a rebellious king, and there was another instance where Saul did a sacrifice. And if you know anything about the Jewish religion, the only people that can do sacrifices are the priests. And the priests only come from the Levitical line of Aaron, who is Abraham's brother. And so Saul did not come from that line because Saul came from, I believe it was the tribe of Dan. But don't quote me on that. I might be mistaken, but I think it was the tribe of Dan. And he had absolutely no right to do that. And so Samuel, the prophet, he confronted him about it and was like, you're rebelling against God and you think you're doing a good thing, but that is not what God instructed you to do. And your rebellious heart is going to have your kingdom taken away from you. So God fired Saul while Saul was still on the throne. and let him know who his replacement was going to be right there in that moment. And so we go fast forward, you have another instance. This is a great example of a good thing versus a God thing. When Saul started to try to attack David and try to kill David because he knew David was going to be next in line for the throne, there were opportunities where David was on the run that he could have killed the king. He could have killed Saul. And in the eyes of many, especially the men that were with him, that would have been a good thing. But David didn't do it. David just let Saul know that he could do it if he wanted to, but it wasn't a God thing. Although for David and for the rest of Israel, that would have been a definite good thing, because Saul was a rebellious king who brought hardships on the nation of Israel instead of the blessings of God. That, in all rights, would have been a good thing to get rid of Saul. But David understood in the spirit that he couldn't do that because it's not a God thing. It was a good thing, but it was not a God thing. And so even down to the time when Saul lost his life and the young man came back and he told David that he slew Saul because Saul asked him to. And David had that man killed. And he cried for Saul, because David understood the concept of a God thing versus a good thing. He says, that is the anointed king of God. How dare you take his life and then act like you did a good thing? That was not a good thing. It absolutely was not a good thing. So there are many examples in the Bible that shows where we think that something is good, but it's definitely not beneficial for us in our lives. And then my last example is, and this one is going to touch a few nerves, but it has to be said. I wasn't woken up out of my sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning to hold back or water anything down. So I'm going to say what I got to say. We all know the scripture. It goes, a man that findeth a wife findeth a good thing and obtains favor in the eyes of the Lord. Which is true. In so many aspects, that is a true thing. But we have a man named Hosea who God ordered to go and find a harlot. If you don't know what a harlot is, that's a prostitute. And you marry this prostitute, take her into your home, and you treat her with the most respect, with the utmost respect. You treat her like a queen. Now, she's going to run out. She's going to run back to the brothels, and she's going to even get pregnant and bring home illegitimate children. But you're going to have to go down there and get her. Pay whatever price they're asking for your wife and bring her back home and take care of her and those illegitimate children as though they were your own. But that was Hosea's good thing. And most people will see a wife as a good thing, but in this instance, Gomer was a God thing. She was a representation of the nation of Israel and how they treated God. Because every single time God would reign in Israel and have them covered and be blessing them, they would always want those outside things, those outside influences, those other gods, the practices of the other nations. They would always want something other than the true creator of all things. They want the creature over the creator. And so Hosea marrying Gomer was an example of the nation of Israel and their relationship with God. So in this instance, their good thing, or Hosea's good thing, was actually a God thing. There was nothing good about Gomer. And God knew that, and that was the whole intent and purpose. There was absolutely nothing good about Gomer as far as what we've read and seen documented throughout history about this story. Good thing versus God thing. It didn't matter how Hosea felt. God wasn't concerned about that because there was a bigger picture. Good thing versus God thing. And people will say, man, why would God have that guy do that? Why would he put him through all of that? Because there was a bigger picture. Our thoughts are not God's thoughts, and our ways are not his ways. And so when we try to bring God down to our level of understanding, that's where we get God misconstrued. Yeah, man. So understand that in our lives, we're going to do a lot of things that seem right to us, but the end thereof is death. And I'm not talking about physical death. Some things can lead to a physical death, but what I'm talking about is the spiritual death. There's spiritual death that is far more important than the physical death. So just when you're out here and you're doing things, just take the time to stop and ask yourself sometimes, is this a good thing or is this a God thing? Because good don't always mean good. Yeah, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it is what it is. That's the message that came to me. That's the message that I'm giving to y'all. This is your boy D Mac. You know what I say, sticks and stones can break your bones, but the word can always heal you. I'm out.